So now it does me great pleasure to introduce our co-host today, Jennifer Brown, my friend, a great confidant in this space as a practitioner who has a wealth of experience that I draw from quite often. And she is so generous with her time and her expertise and knowledge. And I'm just really grateful that she has also said yes to being here today with us as a co-host. And as we always do, I want to give Jennifer a formal introduction so that you all will know the credentials that she brings and the lens that she brings to this space. And then we'll bring her on to greet this audience in her own way. Jennifer Brown is an award-winning entrepreneur, speaker, author, and diversity and inclusion expert who is deeply passionate about building more inclusive workplaces where more of us can feel welcomed, valued, respected, and heard. That's all of us. We want to feel seen, valued, and heard, right? As the founder and CEO of Jennifer Brown Consultant, also known as JBC, a certified woman and LGBT-owned firm, Jennifer and her team design and execute inclusion strategies that have been implemented by some of the biggest companies and nonprofits in the world. She's also the best-selling author of not one, but two books, Inclusion, Diversity, The New Workplace, and The Will to Change, 2017, and secondly, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, Your Role in Creating Cultures of Belonging where everyone can thrive, which was released in 2019. And also it's a shortlist winner of the OWL OWL Award and winner of the 2019 Nautilus Book Awards Business and Leadership category. Her podcast, The Will to Change, many of you in this community, I'm sure are familiar with it, is downloaded by nearly 15,000 listeners per month. Catch that, 15,000 per month. She is a sought after keynote speaker and expert for leading research institutions and business schools. She lives in New York City with her partner of over 20 years, Michelle, and you can learn more about Jennifer Brown at jenniferbrownspeaks.com. So help me in your own way, in our own virtual way as we can, through your reactions, your emojis, your chats, whatever it is, but help me to welcome my friend Jennifer Brown today as our guest co-host. And Jennifer, welcome. I would love for you just to take a moment in your own way, your own words, just to provide some additional intel about yourself and the lens that you bring to this space that we would not be able to know just by reading your bio. And I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, what a lovely intro. Thank you, Nika. And thanks for all the greetings, everybody in chat. I'm so honored to be joining you and meeting all of you. And hopefully we'll get some good questions too. And Nika, between the two of us, I think we can at least generate some good ideas for this wonderful and complex work that we do, that we happen to do together. So
yes,
thanks, everybody. Thanks for the welcome.
I feel like complex is such an understatement, and it depends on the day, but as complex as it is, it's also so rewarding when you can find and realize that impact is being made. And so it's the extreme of both ends sometimes. And I know that you can attest to that. And so there's so much I want to cover with you in this hour. And I want to be selective because I feel like we could really go off into so many different directions. I want to also make sure that we're allowing our audience time to learn from you as well. We're getting compliments on our earrings, by the way. So I told Jennifer I loved her earrings when she first joined. So thank you. Thank you.
Back at you.
So when you and I connected, it was a few years ago, and I remember I was enthralled with you and your leadership, and I had followed your work for quite some time. And I, on a whim, just took a chance, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to reach out, and I did. And you responded. I don't mean someone from your office, but you responded, and I was floored. And that is really, Jennifer, and a testament to who you are, how accessible you allow yourself to be. Now, don't everyone just go and bombard Jennifer with emails today. But my point is that even when you had reached such a place of great stature of success as a thought leader and someone with the voice of authority in this space, you said yes to an invitation that I extended to you. And I will forever be grateful. And since that time, I feel like we have created this bond, and I have been able to call on you time and time again. And so I just first and foremost just want to thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your leadership and influence in this space. And thank you for saying yes to me many times over and over again.
You're easy to say yes to. Does everybody
You're
agree?
so kind, Jennifer. So I took a moment to actually source a clip from when you presented a few years ago. You were the opening keynote for a large full day summit, and you were riveting. And your story of how in which you decided to pivot and leverage your voice, and the audience will soon understand what I'm talking about, was so impressionable that I want this audience to have the benefit of being aware of that. So I am going to share my screen because I want people to be able to witness this. I'm going to make sure that sound is on. And it's a little under 2 minutes, this clip is, but it is necessary for us to share this.
The voice that you just heard was mine. So I grew up in a musical family, and from a very early age, I was encouraged to perform and get out on the edge of the stage. I had a stage mom. I don't know if any of you had one of those. But as a kid, I loved it. I actually relished it. I love moving audiences with my message. So I was very fortunate to be able to move to New York City and study operatic vocal performance. Can you imagine? And in the course of my operatic training, I discovered that life would have other plans for me. Sadly, I injured my voice, and it kept happening. And I had to get not one, but 2 vocal surgeries. So the recovery from vocal surgery, I can tell you, is complete silence for a period of weeks. And then all that comes out when you're finally permitted to make a sound is a small, tiny, high-pitched squeak. So heartbroken, despairing, confused, I licked my wounds. I tried to recover. I worked really hard, but my instrument would be forever compromised. So performers are agile. We land on our feet. We're really good at that. And I followed some ex-stage performers who said, you know, you love the stage. Why don't you look into the field of corporate training? And I did, and I loved it. And I got a second master's degree in something called organizational change and leadership. And I would proceed to have a series of HR roles, and then I would found my own company 13 years ago. And to this day, I get to work across the Fortune 1000, helping them to build more inclusive workplaces where all of us can feel welcomed, valued, respected, and heard.
This is out.
It's so wild to watch yourself.
I know. I bet it is. I bet it is. I love that though. I love that opening. I love that story. And you often lead in with that story when you share with audiences. So what is it like to actually watch that, to see yourself on stage talking about your story? Do you often go back and watch yourself?
No, for all the reasons we all know. But you know, what it reminds me of is I remember the days many years ago when I desperately wanted my story. I wanted to discover my story. And it was so hard. I knew so much I wanted to be on the stage, and I needed something that would be powerful and that would open up the dialogue and capture audiences, right? Capture their attention. And also begin to challenge audiences with, well, who do I think this woman is that I'm looking at? And you know, how wrong we are when we make snap judgments. And so when I was forced to give, and I know this sounds strange to say I was forced to give a TEDx, but I was terrified and I didn't want to do it. And this was about a decade ago. And I knew I had 10 minutes, and it was my message in a bottle. And I locked myself in a room and came up with that story and realized that the voice in my life has been a metaphor for something that I have lost and had to fight to get back, but also not having a voice as somebody who's LGBTQ, not having a voice as a female in a male dominated world. And I realized that now my purpose is to give voice to others, to give voice to the voiceless in organizations, which was me and my story, right? Feeling I had to be closeted and afraid and not being able to therefore do my best work. but I would realize the purpose of my life was actually to realize how powerful the voice is to use, and how necessary it is for us to elevate voices that aren't ours, so that we can have a more complete set of voices building the workforce of the future. So when I talk about storytelling, there is nothing as effective as the pressure of a TEDx coming up and saying, this is my shot. And that story came out of locking myself in a room and saying, what is the logic of my life? Like, if these are lights on sort of the Christmas lights, what happened, what led to this, what led to that, and how it was all meant to unfold the way that it did. And I find it to be a really grounding story to share on stage, because it's so personal, and it also role models vulnerability and fear when we think that we've lost everything. And yet a door opens, and our job is to notice the doors that open to us and make sure that we go through those and have courage. So just a lot comes to mind from that.
I know. So for those of you who don't know, not only is Jennifer just this astute authority in this space of DEI, but she's also a very beautiful orator. I love hearing you speak. The way in which you put words together, they are always so impressionable. And I just appreciate that about you. So you talked about giving voice to the voiceless. And I want us to unpack that a little bit further, because it as a woman of color, I certainly realize that I have often found myself diminishing my voice because of fear or because of other insecurities. And I realize the implications for me. And so I want us to just talk a little bit further about what are the implications when people in general minimize themselves in the workplace or even other spaces. What does it do to that environment and that culture and to the individual personally?
Yeah. And, if you let the clip keep running, Nika, you know where I go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Immediately I go to, so how are we not bringing our full selves to work? And what do I know about that as an LGBTQ woman, afraid of not being in the dominant group and being honest about who I am, who I love, who I live with, my sort of lens of problem solving, which is a product of my identities. And yet being afraid that that's not going to be accepted, and that my identity is literally my visible and invisible identities are literally going to impact my ability to be heard. And Nika, I appreciate, as I've learned that about myself, then I started to broaden it out and learn about other identities and the impact of those identities, right? Identities like yours and so many others. And that's what I teach from now, is that I've been endeavoring to be apprenticing myself as an aspiring ally to other identities and those lived experiences, so that anytime I'm in a room, I'm vigilant, I'm checking for all of that. But yes, what you said is, it's exhausting, it's fatiguing, it's code switching. Any of you know that wonderful podcast on NPR, the activity of needing to constantly check for psychological safety, and then calibrate and diminish, play up, play down the differences that we anticipate we will be stereotyped because of. We anticipate the microaggressions. So this kind of double work we do, right? I wrote the book on inclusion, and I'm in a room, and arguably I shouldn't be going through any of this, but I still, when I walk into a room, I absolutely check my safety. And it's funny because I've really challenged myself around that, because I know too that there's so much diversity that I can't see in any given room of people. So inclusion needs to include everyone. And so by me walking in and assuming that I don't have the psychological safety, when really I've learned a room that, for example, looks like white, straight, cisgender men, there's a lot going on, but they will not reveal that unless they feel the psychological safety, and I wouldn't know, and I can't perceive it. But what I've learned through our research is it's there. It's just, it looks different. It's around different dimensions. There's a whole different dynamic amongst those with apparent privilege and those in leadership roles, that makes it much more difficult to locate it and then use it as part of your leadership and how you show up. So that's actually work I get to do these days that I really enjoy it. I love those moments when somebody says, I didn't realize that was a diversity dimension, and I didn't realize how much effort I've been putting into hiding it my whole life. And I don't know how to talk about it, but I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Can you help me? And that is the most amazing question I ever get. And then we get to go on a journey together.
I love that. I love that. You brought to the fore just the realization and as a great reminder that safety works both ways. I mean, sometimes the safety really could be there, but perhaps we are inhibited from being able to receive and embrace that safety because of circumstances that took place in other environments, right? And we carry that with us.
Yes, we do.
And I have seen it be harmful on both ends, to where organizations are structured in such a way to where it's hard for someone to feel a sense of safety. But then I have also seen it to where organizations work really, really hard to get it right. But sometimes people, just because of past experiences, past trauma, they're so triggered that it's hard for them to even believe that there's a path forward for them to feel safe. And so I just, do you have thoughts about that?
Oh my goodness, yes. It's so hard to ask, to say that that could be past trauma and it may not be present, right? That the
Yes.
threat that we remember in our bodies, because this is visceral stuff. I mean, we carry it in our bodies. It is a visceral reaction to what we see if we are in a room, or we get a certain question, or we hear a certain comment, or even a microaggression, right? That somebody has never gotten feedback around. We could choose, we are going to feel that trauma triggered. And I think the challenge and the courage comes from noticing the trigger, committing again to showing up for another human being, and saying, I have to keep staying in this arena. I have to keep, because my healing from my trauma is bound up in my ability to partner with somebody on their journey. Like,
yes,
my healing around my, masculinity, for example, relationship in those ways has grown by being a part of the Better Man Conference, where I'm literally healing in the presence of men investigating their masculinity. As a woman, I never get those chances to look at my trauma and say, what would healing look like, and with whom would I heal? And it's with these men in Better Man who are like, I want to heal myself from toxic masculinity.
Yes.
And just being a part of that is so transformational. And I honestly, I wonder if for me anyway, I think it's the best healing modality. Now I don't want to speak for everybody, because some of us heal differently, but putting ourselves in relationship like that, and having those moments of truth and vulnerability and learning and moving together forward is transformative. I mean, so I can feel the healing happening. But I think if we rest in the trauma and we say, well, I'm done with that, I don't want to engage, it's not my job. I get all that. We're exhausted from teaching. We're exhausted from educating and showing up and saying, that was a microaggression, I just wanted to give you feedback, and doing it in this like exquisitely gentle way where like nobody feels threatened and triggered because of the feedback we're giving.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's exhausting. It really is. And yet I want a future that's built by all of us. And so I want to bring people along because that's important to me. And I think it's important for our transformation and our ultimately, whether this kind of takes root, this DEI work, is, can we involve everybody? And what is this going to mean for everybody? That's where I tend to focus. So it helps me think about the goal as well, like our shared goal, what we can create and shape together, and how all of our voices need to be at that table. So when I feel tired of educating or annoyed or triggered, I think about that bigger goal that I have, and the kind of world I'm trying to build.
I love that togetherness, connectedness, and we have to want to heal, and we have to all attempt to be on this path forward plan of wanting to do it together. I love that. So you referenced the Better Man Conference, and I suspect that probably many that are joined here today are familiar with the Better Man Conference, but for those who are not, I would love for you to introduce that a little bit further, because I would like for us to talk about inclusive masculinity and male as allies. And so talk about the Better Man Conference.
Oh, one of my favorite topics. Yes, so Better Man is really one of the only places, and they have conferences throughout the year. So please sign up for notices about the dates and all that. But they are, it's led by Ray Arata, and really a heart-centered leader who has never quite felt like he fit in what's called the Man Box. And so the Man Box, there's a wonderful TED Talk on the Man Box by Tony Porter. I would recommend everybody check it out. But once you realize, I mean, the empathy that I have grown through studying the straitjacket, so to speak, of masculinity, and how it has not allowed for the full expression for men of all identities. And then the intersectionality amongst the group of men, men are not a monolith. There's men of color experience, right? There's trans men and gender nonconforming men. There's so many different, there's diversities within the diversity. And that was such a powerful aha. And I find that whenever I want to other somebody, I find myself kind of seeing a group as a monolith, and then pulling myself back from that and remembering the sheer number of voices at something like the Better Man, and checking myself, and seeing, as an ally, I like to think of my aspiring ally work too, like, for men, which is this interesting flip, because we used to think allies have all the privilege, and, us marginalized folks that need allyship have less, and it's this binary, like we always like to use binaries. But I feel very much an allyship and solidarity with men unpacking their experience and what has been limiting about that to them, and how they want to change, but feel there's so much risk to changing and showing up differently. I want to be in support of that. So, and it's my own learning too, because those are the audiences, Nika, that I find myself with so often, is groups of, frankly, white male leaders, because that's where I spend a lot of my time at the executive level. And so I've got to understand this, I have to make sure I hold space for that group to learn and progress. So it's just very instructional. I would really recommend everybody check it out, and help the Better Man too become more representative, because they've been on a journey too. Like, I've been able to support and put forward a lot of different voices that weren't heard within the masculinity conversation too, or that they're happening in silos. So, Black men have, I don't know if you all followed the Icon Summit that Wayne Sutton held about Black and brown men and mental health last week. But there need to be these unique conversations by identity, because they are different. But then there need to be these coming together moments of, let's talk about what we share, but let's talk about what's unique in each of our lived experiences. And I think that's a beautiful format to think about for anything. It's sort of, where do we need to have single identity conversations, and where do we need to have cross identity conversations? And all of those, it's a both and. And, we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
I love that. I love that. That's taken me directly into the next question. By the way, a lot of the references that you've provided, we've been able to put those tools and resources into the chat. So I encourage everyone to make sure you're paying attention to that. So you mentioned the both and you and I have had some conversations about how it's so nuanced, but part of being on a journey of helping to bring others along in their learning journey so they can become ambassadors and champions of DEI is being able to hold the middle, right? And we know that it can be really messy, and that there's a lot of complexity around holding the middle, especially for those of us who are really eager to see progress made at a pace that feels comfortable for us, right? But we have to recognize that people are at different mental models. They're entering the conversation at different places from a knowledge base. And so you often talk about holding the middle, recognizing that there are both ands and lots of nuance. And so can you talk about that from your perspective and your approach to how do you effectively hold the middle, and why that's important as we bring people along in this conversation?
I love that visual. And somebody asked in chat, thank you, Zoe, how do you protect your energy? Which is kind of related to that.
Yes.
When Nika, when we're holding the middle, right? It's Gumby. It's like, the push and the pull and the hazards. I think of a bridge. I always think of this bridge metaphor, and I think about white water just rushing by right under the bridge. And I think about the bridge maybe not looking so solid. And I think about, why would I cross this bridge? Because I don't know what's on the other side. That's wilderness. I don't know what's over there, and I'm unsure, and I don't know how I'm going to cope. I don't know if I have the tools that I need in my backpack. Like, I don't know if I'm worthy of the journey. And I think of it as enabling people to cross the bridge, safely. And enter something that I think we all are entering, which is the unknown. And the unknown is I'm afraid, I don't understand, I'm going to say the wrong thing, I'm going to cause harm. Again, in that piece, I feel sometimes we in D&I, we're Sherpas, we're waymakers, we're guides into that wilderness that feels overwhelming and scary, and like we're sort of letting go of what grounded us and what's familiar. And so we are on the edge, and we can see to the other side. Like we can see the beauty and the transformation that's part of the journey. And this is part of, I think, that the visionary like character of people who do DEI work is we know, because we are on calls like this, we get the goosebump moments, like we get the moments of truth, like we feel it in our bones. When Nika, you and I met, and we're like, we understood each other immediately, like we knew what we needed to go do. And so how many times does that kind of happen in our life where we feel this deep bond without even knowing each other? We know each other. So it is so sacred and so, frankly, like really spiritual. And I always think it's like my church. I mean, being in community with other change makers and advocates is like coming home. And I think we've missed that this year, right? This past year. Just being physically with each other and sharing, plugging into the energy source of each other. So the self-care piece, tricky, because I feel if I'm not careful, I'm like, oh, I'm alone, I'm doing this, I'm the wilderness guide, I gotta like do everything for everybody. And I think that plugging ourselves in on a regular basis and just feeling the energy and reminding ourselves like we're not alone. We may be doing this work in parallel, as pioneers on our own spaces, but watching our energy and really radical self-care, like spending as much time getting as we're giving. And Nika, I don't know how you manage this, I'd be curious, but filling our cup as much as we teach and we're sort of outward in our work. What, and this is going to be different for all of us, but what fills, I've been asking myself lately, because I give and I give and I give. And yes, a lot of pro bono stuff too, but also working with executive teams is hard. It takes a lot out of me, because I get questions in those spaces where I'm like triggered. And I have to say, I have to think to myself, how will I replenish myself? And it's not that this experience is bad. It's necessary. And I'm actually good at it. Like, I think it's a great niche for me. Like, I know what I need to do, but I think we just need to notice and become exquisitely aware of, okay, where's my energy meter? And what are my tools to refill it? And how much of this tough work can I do? And by the way, who are the allies that can do this work instead of me, so I can take a break? I mean, it's a relay race, and I want to have somebody that I can hand the baton to, Nika, like you're ahead of me right on the track. And I'm like, take it, and you're like, got it. And I'm going to run for a while as your ally. I'm going to take it. And then there's going to be somebody else that hand it to. And I can say, okay, I need to do this self-care and just take a breather, knowing that the work is continuing, but that it's not always incumbent on me.
Yes, that is so rich. I love that, Jennifer, so much. And it's so validating in many regards, because I believe that those of us who are in this space, we care deeply about the work, and to your point, we have to also breathe and give ourselves permission to know that we are not going to solve it in and of ourselves, or even within the confines of our respective organizations. There's so much to be accomplished and addressed and attended to in this large body of work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I am so glad that there's so many different practitioners out there, that they have their a deep well of understanding of where they want to try to move the ball forward within this broad space, that I don't have to feel like I need to stand in the gap for everything.
Right.
And that is so important, because I think that that's part of why sometimes as practitioners in this space, we really wear ourselves down, is because we feel the weight and the pressure of having to fill the gap everywhere. And we're not going to solve every hurt, every harm. And so what I often say is, what can we do within our sphere of influence with what we know we can do well to create progress, not perfection, but progress, and let those moments of progress that are happening consistently to allow us to feel good that we're making impact, because
Oh,
there's
totally.
so much to try to tackle.
It is. And remember, everybody, we can't afford to lose a single messenger
Yes.
for the reasons you just outlined, Nika. And again, being delicate with our feedback, right? And calling in conversations, thinking about how we hold space and grace for learners to stumble and to get back up and dust themselves off and say, okay, I'm back in it today. What else do you have for me? Like, where else can I learn? How else can I get better? But remember, the messenger matters as much as the message with this work, I have found, and I don't know if all of you agree, but that feeling, right? When you've said something 10 times and somebody else just says it once, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
That, right?
I learned a long time ago that we need to be willing from a vulnerable state to just quiet our ego. It has nothing to do with you. It's just the circumstances in the moment, but go with it because the outcome is still getting us where we need to be. So
it's so true. And I mean, if we can equip all identities to speak competently and authentically about this, I honestly believe we would get a lot more change and we would get it more quickly, because people, look, they feel this is human, right? We feel more comfortable with somebody who looks like us,
right,
or is sort of one deviation away from looking like us, which is probably like me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so we're all kind of several deviations away, or maybe many deviations away, right? But I do think, goodness, if we could really shore up our allies and accelerate their journey, it would make less work for us and allow that self-care. But also, my goodness, what a transformational opportunity for people,
right?
To go from 0 to 60, to look back at their leadership 2 years ago or a year ago and say, I learned so much, and now I know how to talk about this, and now I can do it in a grounded way, in a passionate way. And I tell leaders, just while we're on the topic, let's speak about privileges with a small p. So this is a piece that I want to give all of you as kind of an unlock, because so many people are stuck. If I had gotten stuck on my privilege, I never would be on that keynote stage. I would be sitting somewhere else, paralyzed with fear and self-doubt and feelings of less than, because DEI has been so focused on marginalized experiences. And that's good, and it needs to continue to be. But we've got to, I think, open the aperture to say, let's talk about privileges with a small p, being beyond white and male privilege, which tends to be how we speak about it. And when we speak about it in that way, it is dismissive, I think, of a lot of other stuff that's going on. But it's also dangerous, because Nika, you and I have privileges. Like,
oh, absolutely.
We have so much we can enact. And
yes.
So anyway, these days I've been saying to people who say, I don't know what to say, Jennifer, I'm not diverse, right? Whatever that means. Right. I'm like, give me 5 minutes and, let's take a walk, and, we'll find some tricky stuff, that you've navigated, right? And exclusion and how that showed up in your life or your loved one's life, or right now is happening in your family, or, there's powerful stuff. But I think too, I've been starting to talk about privileges, to say, what access do I have? What permission do I have? What mountains can I move because of my position? Or whom can I center with the platform that I have? Whom can I champion and mention their name and push for something for them? Who will listen to me? Who do I have in my Rolodex? I don't know. Like, we all, did I have pandemic privilege? Do I have the ability to have space and a wireless connection, and I'm not parenting and homeschooling and, dealing with a mental health issue, or I'm a single parent? There's just, so when you start to really be inclusive of how we talk about these things, and then I give permission to these leaders to say, talk about your privileges. Like, the only way we're going to change this conversation to reach those of us who are sitting on the sidelines is to say, what matters to me is, what are you doing with what you've been given? That's all I want to know. That's the standard that I hold myself to every day. And funny enough, I was in the LGBTQ rights community for so long that I was like, well, I'm marginalized. What do you mean? Like, I didn't have any room for this. I have so much room for it. And I'll never lose, like, I'm so deeply grounded in the communities of identity that I share. But but the privileged identity communities are ones I share too, you know, and I want to normalize, or like I say, usualize. I want
Yes.
to usualize this conversation because I believe it's going to be a way in for people to somehow find a voice, find a toehold in this conversation.
Yeah. No, I so agree with how in which you think about and unpack privilege. You know, I often share, you know, with audiences that as a Black female, I am privileged in many regards. I grew up in a home with two parents. I grew up in a home where I had more than enough. I am a well-able-bodied individual, and you know, again, the influence and maybe some of the circles and the connections. I mean, all of that certainly positions us to be able to use those influences in a way honorably to help others. And so I am totally with you. Now, what I also find is very important though, as I'm communicating that, is to say, my sharing of the privilege that I have as a Black woman does not at all negate the fact that white privilege exists.
Right.
Because it does. It just means that, you know, white people have had burdens, yes, of course, but the color of their skin is not a reason for those burdens and hardships. And so I find it appropriate to make sure that I align that broad message of privilege with the follow-up of, oh, and yes, by the way, because I think that's important too. But you're right. If we all can take the time to be intentional about identifying and acknowledging our sources of power and privilege, that gives us such better ability to be more effective in our ally work. Right.
Yeah. It's so concrete. It's very concrete.
Yeah.
I'm like, because everyone's coming to me like all like this is mysterious or something.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And I don't know if we've done a
or
good
they feel
job.
shamed by it.
Well,
like,
yes,
oh, you're saying I have privilege? Oh, they see it as an insult. I know.
No.
Yeah. It's not a bad word. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to just remind the audience that we're going to be shifting in just a moment to take your questions, and we welcome you to unmute yourself and ask your question directly to Jennifer. But we also value if you would like to just place your question into the chat, and we're paying close attention to that to make sure they get entered into the conversation. Before I go to those questions, I want to give you a chance to think about what you want to contribute to the conversation. I want to talk about remote work because I know that your organization is 100% remote, and it has been since inception. The same for my agency. It has been remote, not because of COVID, but since inception. And we're finding, though, that a lot of organizations, that's not the case. It was the pandemic that created a situation whereby now they have these hybrid approaches, or even maybe they're making decisions to allow people to stay remote. I want to talk about the considerations that organizational leaders should have in mind as we embark upon now what's becoming a different way of doing work. You know, what do people need to be mindful of? My shirt says visibility is power. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is that people often, the way in which they can help navigate upward mobility, especially those who are in marginalized populations, is having that level of visibility and proximity to people in those positions who can influence their growth. And so that's one thing that comes to mind for me, but I'm sure there's a plethora of others. I just want to get you to talk about what are some of those top of mind things that people need to be considering right now with so many going remote.
Oh my goodness. Like virtual inclusion, like somebody or we need to write that book, like
virtual inclusion. Yes.
You know, and visibility is true. Like it is even more difficult, I think, to make sure that we don't lose a generation of talent because of our virtual reality now. And the fact that it's out of sight, out of mind. And that's human. But that to me is a strong call to action to leaders or even peers. I mean, this does not need to be just done by leaders. This is all of our responsibility.
Of course.
To elevate voices in our teams and make sure that we don't lose. We lost millions of women from the workforce last year.
Right.
And other, underrepresented talent, I believe, is very much at risk, especially in this environment of out of sight, out of mind. I mean, at least in the physical environment, and there's, Nika, there's a lot of studies too that contradict this, which is, I don't want to go back to a workplace where I'm hearing microaggressions and feeling, having a toxic experience. Like I'd rather stay virtual.
Yeah.
And I get that. And that is so, I believe that is true. So part of me is like, maybe it's psychologically safest for some of us to engage with work virtually because we didn't have a good experience, right? Our bodies and our skin tone and our identities and our gender expression triggered things in the physical workplace very, very differently than, me from the neck up, in a video. So there's that, but on the flip side, to let talent kind of fall out, because some of us are sort of covering, we're managing psychological safety. Maybe we're not, we are not able to, or we are exhausted by promoting ourselves and showing up and bringing our full self to work and making a good impression, or whatever we manage, right, with our image virtually. It's a very difficult medium, I think, to shine in, and also to have those chance encounters that lead to sponsorship. So remember, everybody, sponsorship is, I am joining my social and professional capital with you, like, because I've seen you do something amazing. I believe in you, and I'm gonna pull. So you're gonna push, and I'm gonna pull, and we're gonna get you up that pipeline. What are the opportunities for those in the virtual space? And I think our responsibility is we've got to be extra vigilant, highlighting our talent, creating introductions, making sure people are in front of or being watched by people with power and influence. We have to activate our sponsorship in a very different way, I think. And we all need to be doing it. We can't just leave this to leaders. We need to be doing it for our colleagues, et cetera, because otherwise this out of sight, out of mind thing is the true exodus. And I tell organizations this, your colleagues that aren't white and male and cisgender were already on the bubble before the pandemic. That we were already struggling to bring our full selves to work. And we are already had a foot out the door, because your culture is not one that makes us feel safe and able to contribute, therefore. And now we have our hands tied behind our back now. So that's my advice. I think the vigilance, the sponsorship, the mentorship, the visibility, we all have to make sure we don't fall out of the system. And, so maybe it means us being much more proactive about building those relationships and making those asks to be in relationship with someone, so that we don't fall out, right? Let's play the game. I mean, the game is, I don't agree with it. The workplace wasn't built by and for so many of us. And that's why it's unhealthy, and it's a toxic place for some of us, right? But if we bail out, I also am mindful that we can't change the system if we're not in it trying to change it. So there's this, I'm torn, because I want health for all of us, and I don't want, and I left the corporate world, Nika. I was like, this is not for me.
I did too.
I know that I'm not going to thrive. Yeah, you did too. So that's real. But, entrepreneurship isn't always possible for some of us.
It's true.
So
very true.
Let's make these companies better with our voices.
I love that. So I want to shift to some questions. And Katrina Stroll, I believe is the pronunciation of the last name. I see your question in the chat, but I want to just pause for a moment to see if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question directly.
Oh Lord. So my question is, what was one of the first steps that you took to push your ego aside? This is something that I, who is a part of several marginalized groups, I still have to work on every single day. So I assume people that don't look like me may have lighter skin than me. It's even more so difficult to do. So what was the first step you had to do to get it started, to get off the ego train?
Oh my gosh, what a question. I love that. I've never been asked it before. And I think about ego all the time. Oh my goodness. Okay, maybe this is helpful. We teach this work, and we teach from our lived experiences, right? And that is unassailable, right? We know what we walk through every day. And that's truth. And one of my pet peeves is somebody arguing with me about my experience. So I'm sure that we've all had those moments, like, why is somebody explaining to me when I'm in a community right now? But the ego is interesting. So the ego wants to have all the answers. The ego wants to protect us, right? The ego wants to be right. The ego wants to be righteous. And I'm just saying, this is for me. So managing my ego of the frustration and the why don't you know this, and how come I have to do this again, or why don't you see, that sort of mix of anger, frustration, righteousness, protection, all of those things I don't find are obviously, I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but they're not conducive, to our health. So if we're in that space, it is probably toxic for us. And we may think we're kind of shoring ourselves up, but the ego is related in my experience to that sort of amygdala hijack we get, which is the fight or flight or freeze piece, where it's like, am I under threat? What do I need to do? Do I respond? Do I lash out? Do I disappear? Do I sort of swallow it and just try to get along? All those things. I think the ego is present in all of those kind of reactions. So is there something besides fight, flight, freeze, appease? Is there something beyond that is from love, from patience, from kindness and compassion? Is that, to me, if I can center on that and see the human across from me and realize, like I said earlier, that I think turning it back on me and imagining like the impact on me of having interactions from an ego place, from somebody else's ego, I think too is really helpful to imagine sort of in the best case scenario, what would this conversation look like and sound like? And if it isn't coming from an ego place, what is it coming from? It's coming from a place of love and patience. So I though I have those ego moments of pride, of wounded pride, of I'm just going to take my marbles and go home because you're never going to get it. And I don't know why I'm here, and what about me? And, and believe me, this is all the inner monologue. You might want to just listen to all that and just write it down, like get it out and just put it down on paper and just look at it and just say, is this the person I want to be? And is there a different way to be that will exhaust me less? And also let me get to the heart of change, the heart of how to be of service. That is a very beautiful place to get. But, and by the way, though, the ego also has positive protective mechanisms. So I don't want to totally dismiss the ego. I mean, Nika, like you and I had to build businesses, right? We had to believe that we had something to say. Like, right. And that had to be like unshakable.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so the ego is the piece of us that said, you have something to say and you matter. So I don't want to demonize the ego. It serves all these different purposes for us. So I think everything in balance, right? And just, it's the noticing, it's the observation, it's the journaling, it's the pausing in our day to say, when did my ego show up today? Was it needed? Because sometimes it's needed.
Yeah.
Was it overkill? Was it not needed? Did it take me down a road? Did I feel exhausted? What was my body telling me? And just kind of, becoming really sensitized to that, I think is what to do with the ego. It's really so interesting. I'm reminded by the way, of Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a book called Big Magic, and it's about her creative process. And I just love her writing, and she's so much more than Eat, Pray, Love, which was her big runaway thing. But she's like, I'm driving the car and I tell ego where to sit in the car.
I love it.
I love that. Like, so ego's in the trunk today, and along with the imposter syndrome is in the back seat. I see you, and I know you're here to protect me. And I know that you're here because I doubted myself, right? And I wanted to keep myself safe. But it's very similar, I think, wrestling with the imposter syndrome as well, which hasn't come up yet today, but I would have imagined it would.
I just don't have enough time, but yes, it's a whole session in and of itself. But yeah, I love the balance that you're bringing to the ego. I often talk about quieting the ego, but now I think I need to revisit that, because you're right. It does serve a really good purpose as well. And
for
so
some of us that are less
balance.
than, like, think about the imposter syndrome is there because we have felt less than. So it's really interesting. Can I just tell this story, Nika?
Please.
I have a book by a straight white man on my shelf that's called Ego is the Enemy. And I thought to myself, maybe for straight white men, but but actually it looks very different for some of us who have struggled to
And we
to
need that
feel-
confidence. Yes.
like,
we need to be
really.
validated. Yes.
So I just think it's such an interesting thing that the messenger, think about that, like through his prism, that's how he understands this. But if I were coaching him and I said, look, you are a leader of so many different identities, and ego shows up differently and is dangerous for some of us to have ego.
Right.
It's dangerous for me or you, Nika, to show up and just be like, I'm awesome, I have all the answers, like, you know, just sit down and listen and take notes, because we will be criticized for showing up in that way. We cannot get away with it.
Well, just ask LeBron James when he was told to shut up and dribble, right?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So,
I see Vicky's hand up. So we have a few minutes left. I want to take your question, Vicky. And then I also see that Paula and Liz Golden have questions. So we're going to do our best to try to get to at least those three, and we'll see what we have left. Okay, Vicky, go for it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. One thing I just wanted to see if you had some thoughts on, I'm sure you can't blow it out too much, but what I notice about what you, Jennifer, what you do and what you do, Dr. White, is there's a craft to what it is that you do when you're engaging with leadership, because there is fragility there. There is, you know, if to give it positive intention, it's not a forced resistance, but a pattern of this is the way I've always done it. This is the way that I succeed. So I'm interested in hearing anything about the craft of persuasion in this space.
What a good
So
question.
good. I know.
Nika, you want to say anything?
Oh my gosh. No, I want this audience to hear from you. We have a few minutes left. So you take that, Jennifer, because I'm curious about your response too.
I mean, the craft, that's the perfect word for it. And
it is.
You know what? Like, sometimes you fall out of your craft, right? Like sometimes you have those moments of being triggered or losing control, or the ego comes in, or the imposter syndrome comes in, right? So I really appreciate it. It's honestly, in how it feels to me, it's a discipline and it's a practice. And, you know, there's no way around this but through. And I learn in community with others. Others learn in different modalities, but I do think, like I was talking about earlier, the patience and the intent versus impact, and seeing through some of the noise of another person. And listen, somebody did this for us. You know, if you are struggling to understand, why do I need to do this? Like, somebody did it for me. Somebody held a space for me to recognize and hear myself, or change my language, or learn and get it wrong. And so anytime I think about, like, well, so what did I appreciate in how somebody held space for me? What did that look like, sound like? Can I take myself back to that and say, okay, so how do I want to then do this? Knowing that somebody will hold space for me again and again and again and again. I just have to believe that this is the way we're going to go forward, is together. So I know it's a little bit Pollyanna, but and you know, and then we need to, if we're being triggered and things are popping up, you know, we've got to manage ourselves in the moment. You know, it's emotional intelligence. We might want to all go back and review, like, things like self-regulation in emotional intelligence. I think about that a lot with DEI work. How do I balance truth telling and kindness?
Yeah.
You know, how do I walk that line? And it is, like you say, it's extremely delicate. It is a craft, because you have to kind of give and take. And it's this walking the tightrope, but it's also an amazing feeling to have done that well, to have balanced those things, to have gotten the message through with kindness and compassion and landed the point. Is, I know, Nika, you probably have those moments, right, where you're just like, like, I reached people and I coached them and they're better for it, and I didn't cause a bunch of collateral damage in the process of doing it. Right? That's the craft.
Yeah, I just put into the chat that leadership is both affection and correction, you know?
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, please. And so, yeah, I think we have to be true to the process and to the work. But I also believe that sometimes people can perceive that accountability is shame. And so we have to balance that too. You know, if we're holding you accountable and we're making sure that you're on this journey of doing it right, to be able to create impact, don't see that as now we're shaming you. So it's delicate balance.
It is.
And I'm getting so sad because we're out of time and there are
I
lots of
know.
other questions in here.
Do it again.
I know we're going to have to do it again.
Yes.
You're definitely one of those individuals that I would say I can bring back probably 10 times over and we still will not get through
I think that's
all of
true.
the conversations. And so, but I'm so glad that we are connected. And I know that this will not be the last time that this audience will have a chance to hear from you. I want to just give you the last words. And so if you want to share about the JVC community, about any upcoming events that's going on, I want to give you the floor to close this out.
Oh, Nika, thank you. And thanks everybody. I loved getting to know you in chat if we don't know each other already. Yes, please join. We have just like this call, we have our call on Thursdays at noon. So please join us. And you can go on Jennifer Brown Consulting and you'll see, if you scroll down, you'll see join the community call. Check out my books, plural podcast called The Will to Change. And I hope we can connect on LinkedIn, everybody. I would love to be connected to you. So if I don't reach out to you, please reach out to me. But let's support each other. And, I'm here to the extent I can, Nika, help and mentor, or at the very least, send you just a keep going on LinkedIn to say, you're not alone and the world needs you and needs us. So needs each one of you with your own unique intersectional stories and privileges. And all of that beautiful mix that makes each one of you who you are. Like, that's what you teach from. And that's why many reasons I love this work. It is so personal, but it's all available to us because we have ourselves as the instrument. So back to a musical reference, we are these beautiful resonating instruments and we tell the truth because we feel it. And that's our gift. And organizations really need us, and now more than ever. So thanks for having me, Nika.
No, thank you for saying yes. I feel so seen, valued, and heard just because she said yes. And again, your words, I'm hanging on to every single one of your words. You are a beautiful orator, and I really appreciate everything that you've contributed to this hour as part of this podcast. So thank you kindly. Thank you to everyone that has joined us today. We look forward to seeing you again on future Intentional Conversation VodCast. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.